What's really down there in Antarctica, huh? You ever catch yourself staring at a map, wondering what they're not telling us about that frozen chunk of nothing at the world's ass end? Is it just ice and wind, or something that'd make you double-check the locks at night? And those big shots pulling levers behind closed doors, don't you reckon they've got something stashed away they'd kill to keep quiet? I'm Lena Voss, and I've been asking those questions longer than I care to admit, ever since a shadow fell across my life that I couldn't shake loose. It was March 2025, and I was rotting in my Portland, Maine, dump, a sagging pile of boards and regrets where the damp clung like a bad habit. The walls wept mildew, the heater wheezed like an old drum, and I wasn't much better off, nursing black coffee that tasted like tar and memories that wouldn't stay buried. I'd been a reporter once, the kind who dug too deep and got burned for it, but now I was just a ghost haunting my own life. That's when it came, an email with no name, no trace, just a blurry satellite snap of something they're calling the ice wall, a crooked scar under the ice near McMurdo Station in Antarctica. Scrawled across it in shaky red ink, they swallow souls. Whispers have been floating around about a strange find down there, the kind of half-baked chatter you catch on late-night feeds, but this hit different. This hit like a fist. My granddad, Elias Voss, went missing in that white hell back in '68. Navy man, tough as nails, but he came home once with stories that didn't fit the man I knew. The wall holds the dark, Lena, he'd mutter, voice low and cracked, his hands trembling like they'd touched something cold and wrong. I chalked it up to the bottle, the war, anything but the truth. Now, staring at that picture, I wasn't so sure. His eyes had been haunted, like he'd seen past the veil and couldn't claw his way back. That email felt like a rope tossed down a well I'd been drowning in, and I grabbed it, packed a bag, cashed out what little I had, and headed for McMurdo. I didn't know what I'd find, but I knew I couldn't stay put with Elias's ghost breathing down my neck. The flight was a blur, a rattling tin can cutting through clouds thick as regret, and when I landed, Antarctica hit me like a slap. McMurdo Station sprawled out under a sky too pale to care, a mess of metal sheds and hunched figures moving through the snow like ants on a corpse. The cold was a living thing, sharp and mean, sinking its teeth into my bones the second I stepped off the plane. They call it a research outpost, but it didn't feel like science. It felt like a cage. The folks in charge, pale-eyed men with smiles that didn't warm, ran the place like they owned the air we breathed. Workers dug through the ice day and night, hands cracked and bleeding, for scraps of food and a bunk to collapse in. Ask what they're after, and you're gone by dawn, lost in the fog, they'd say, like it was some old sailor's yarn. But I saw the fear in their eyes, the kind that sticks when you've brushed up against something you can't name. I kept my head down, played the part of a nobody, but I watched. Watched the overseers strut around like kings, their coats crisp against the grime. Watched the workers flinch when the wind picked up, like it carried more than snow. That first night, I slipped out to Winter Quarters Bay, a stretch of ice and dark water that gleamed under a sky heavy with stars. The cold bit deeper out there, a raw, gnawing ache, but I stood still, listening. That's when it came, a sound that wasn't wind or waves or anything you'd call right. A low, shuddering groan rolled up from under the ice, slow and broken, like voices trapped in a bad dream, pleading through the dark. It wasn't loud, but it was close, too close, wrapping around me like a hand I couldn't shake off. My breath fogged sharp and quick, and I swear I felt something shift, like the ice was staring back. I stumbled back to the sheds, heart hammering, and ducked into one that reeked of rust and old oil. The ceiling sagged, groaning under the weight of snow, and as I caught my breath, something fluttered down, a yellowed scrap of paper, edges curled like it had been waiting for me. Elias's handwriting, jagged and frail, they don't sleep, they wait. My stomach dropped, cold as the bay outside. Wait for what? For me to show up. For the world to crack. Out here, the ice wasn't just a place. It was a witness, and it knew I'd come. That scrap of paper sat in my hand like a live coal, burning through the cold that had settled in my fingers. Elias's words, "They don't sleep, they wait," weren't just a note, they were a warning, scratched out by a man who'd seen too much. I stuffed it into my pocket, quick and clumsy, like I could hide it from whatever was listening. The shed creaked around me, a tired old thing sagging under the weight of secrets, and I couldn't shake the feeling I'd stepped into something bigger than me, bigger than Elias, even. Out there, beyond the bay, the ice was humming its song, and I was starting to think it wasn't singing to nobody. I slipped back to the bunkhouse, keeping to the shadows where the overseer's lanterns didn't reach. McMurdo at night was a different beast, quiet, sure, but not the kind of quiet that settles you down. It was the quiet of a held breath, a place waiting to snap. The workers were sprawled out on thin cots, snoring or staring at the ceiling, their faces hollowed out by more than just hunger. I'd heard the rumors already, passed around in low whispers over lukewarm soup, folks disappearing, not just the loudmouths but the quiet ones too, the ones who didn't make waves. Gone to the ice, they'd say, like it was a prayer or a curse. I didn't buy it, not the way they meant it. This wasn't some accident of nature swallowing them up. This was deliberate, cold as the wind cutting through the gaps in the walls. The next day, I played dumb, tagged along with a digging crew headed out past the station. The overseers didn't care who you were as long as you swung a pick, and I needed eyes on what they were after. We trudged through snow that crunched like brittle bones, the air so sharp it stung my lungs with every breath. They took us to a spot a mile out, a flat stretch marked by stakes driven deep into the ice, like they were pinning something down. The workers moved slow, mechanical, their hands wrapped in rags that didn't do much against the chill. I watched the head man, a wiry bastard with a face like a hatchet, pace the line, barking orders in a voice that didn't carry warmth. "Deeper," he kept saying, "deeper," like he was talking to the ice itself. I swung my pick with the rest, but my eyes were everywhere. The ice here wasn't like the bay, clean and smooth, reflecting the sky like a cracked mirror. This stuff was cloudy, streaked with dark veins that twisted down into the depths, like roots from some tree nobody'd planted. Every strike sent up a shiver, a faint vibration that didn't feel right, like we were tapping on a door that wasn't supposed to open. The others didn't notice, or didn't care, but I did. I'd felt that hum before, out by the bay, and it was louder here, closer, like whatever was down there was waking up slow and mean. Halfway through the shift, a kid, no more than 20, all bones and scared eyes, dropped his pick and froze, staring at the hole he'd made. I edged over, keeping my head low, and saw it, a glint in the ice, soft and sickly, like the glow you'd see in a jar of fireflies gone sour. It wasn't natural, not a crystal, not a trick of the light. It pulsed, faint and steady, like a heartbeat buried deep. The kid's breath hitched, fogging in the air, and before I could say a damn thing, Hatchet Face was on him, yanking him back so hard his feet left the ground. "Keep moving," the overseer snarled, but his eyes flicked to that glow, and I swear I saw something in them, fear, maybe, or recognition. They hauled the kid off, said he'd slipped and needed rest, but I knew better. I'd seen that look, the way they hustled him out of sight, quick and quiet, like he'd crossed a line they couldn't let him uncross. The rest of us kept digging, but the mood shifted, heavy as the clouds rolling in overhead. That glow stuck with me, though, nagging like a splinter under a nail. Frost Syndicate, that's what I'd started calling them in my head, these pale-eyed sons of bitches who ran McMurdo like a fiefdom. They weren't just working the ice for kicks, they were after something they'd lose, people to keep under wraps. Night came fast out there, the kind of dark that swallows you whole, and I went back to Winter Quarters Bay alone. I had to know, had to hear it again. The ice stretched out under a sky prickled with stars, cold and hard like a slab over a grave. I stood at the edge, boots crunching soft, and waited. It didn't take long. That groan came up again, low and mournful, rolling through the ice like a wave you feel more than hear. This time, it wasn't just sound, it was weight, pressing down on my chest, making my knees wobble. I leaned closer, squinting into the dark water lapping at the ice's rim, and saw something move, a shadow, long and thin, sliding under the surface like it knew I was watching. My heart kicked hard, and I stumbled back, breath fogging wild in the air. That wasn't a fish, wasn't anything I'd ever seen. It was wrong, too wrong, and for a second, I thought I heard my name in that groan, faint and far, like Elias calling from the other side of a wall I couldn't break. I turned tail, legging it back to the station, but the cold followed me, heavy and close, like it had latched on. Back in the shed, I dug through my pack, hands shaking, and pulled out Elias's note again. They don't sleep, they wait. I sat there, staring at it till my eyes burned, and realized something that turned my guts to ice. Whatever was down there, it wasn't just waiting anymore. It was awake, and it knew I'd come knocking. Shadows on the ice. What's really lurking under the Ross ice shelf, huh? You ever stop and wonder what could squat down there in Antarctica's frozen guts, where the sun don't dare peek? Is it just ice playing games with your head, or something that'd make you bolt the door and pray it don't knock? And those bastards pulling strings, don't you think they're hiding a truth so ugly they'd bury it under 1,000 miles of frost? I'm Lena Voss, and I've been chasing that question since McMurdo Station turned my world upside down, since that groan under winter quarters base sank its teeth into me and wouldn't let go. 3 days in that white hell, and I'd figured out one thing: the ice wasn't just cold, it was alive, and it was lying through its teeth. I couldn't shake it, that sound, that note from Elias, my granddad who'd vanished out here in '68. They don't sleep, they wait, he'd scratched out, and it stuck to me like damp rot, festering in my pocket as I lay awake in the bunkhouse. I'd seen too much already: the Syndicate's pale-eyed overseers, the workers disappearing into the fog, that sick glow in the ice that made a kid's eyes go wide before they hauled him off. It wasn't chance, wasn't nature, it was them, the Frost Syndicate, digging for something they'd lose, people to keep quiet. Elias's voice was in that groan, faint and far, and I couldn't sit still with it gnawing at me. He'd left me a map, carved into an old Zippo lighter, the kind you'd find rusting in a dead man's coat. It pointed out past McMurdo, to the Ross ice shelf, a stretch of ice so vast it felt like God had dropped it and walked away. I waited till night swallowed McMurdo whole, when the overseers were drowning their sins in cheap whiskey, and slipped out. The wind was a cruel son of a bitch, howling like a banshee, clawing at my parka as I trudged through snow that snapped underfoot like brittle twigs. The workers had muttered about a crack out there, a gash in the shelf they weren't supposed to mess with, said it went deep, down to places that didn't fit on any chart. I figured that's where Elias wanted me to go. If he'd seen something out here, something that took him from me, I'd find it, or I'd find him. Either way, I wasn't about to turn tail and run back to Portland's gray drizzle. The Ross ice shelf rose up after an hour's slog, a white wall under a sky black as a coal pit, its edges catching starlight like a blade honed sharp. I found the crevice, narrow, jagged, a slit in the ice that looked like something had torn it open and dared me to step inside. My flashlight jittered in my hand, throwing shaky beams as I wedged through, boots scraping walls too smooth, too old, like they'd been carved by something that wasn't human. I dropped down, maybe 10 feet, and hit the floor hard, knees jarring in a tunnel that smelled wrong, not like ice or dirt, but like something left to rot, a sour stink that caught in my throat and held on tight. The air was thick, heavy with a chill that didn't match the cold outside, and I swept my light around slow, like I was afraid of what it'd catch. The walls were a mess of junk, rusted hulks of machines, twisted and bent like they'd been tossed aside in a hurry, crates with faded marks I couldn't make out, and rows of glass jars glowing soft and sick, like they'd trapped fireflies gone bad. Frost Syndicate wasn't just smuggling gear, they were moving something worse, something that turned folks into husks, eyes cloudy like they'd checked out before their hearts gave up. I'd seen that glow in the ice back at McMurdo, and now here it was, bottled up like poison begging to spill. My gut twisted, a cold knot tightening, and I took a step, boots echoing sharp in the quiet. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving where my light didn't reach. Tall, too damn tall, with arms that hung like broken branches, swaying slow like it was tasting the air. My breath caught, fogging in front of me, and I swear the tunnel shrank, the walls leaning in like they wanted a front row seat. It didn't turn, didn't make a peep, just bent over something small and still in the dark, a shape that might have been alive once, might have been one of us. My heart slammed against my ribs, loud enough I thought it'd give me away, and I edged closer, stupid and scared all at once. The thing didn't flinch, just kept at its work, and I saw it clearer, long fingers, thin as wire, fussing with that shape like it was picking at a meal gone cold. I backed off fast, too fast, and the ice under me groaned, a low, angry rumble that shook the tunnel. Then it split, sharp as a snapped spine, and black water bubbled up, thick and slow, stinking of things better left buried. I scrambled back, legs shaking like a newborn colt's, but not before I heard it, Elias's voice, faint and far, calling, "Lena," from somewhere deep in that hole. It wasn't my head playing tricks, it was real, bouncing off the ice like he was down there, trapped in whatever the Syndicate was hiding. I hauled myself out, the cold clinging like a wet coat, but one thought burned through the panic: they weren't just feeding their greed. They were feeding something else, something awake, and it knew my name. I crouched there, panting, the wind howling overhead like it was laughing at me. The crevice loomed behind, a dark mouth breathing that sour stink, and I couldn't move, not yet. My flashlight flickered, weak and tired, and I aimed it back down, half expecting that shadow to climb out after me. It didn't, but the jars glowed brighter now, pulsing slow like a heartbeat, and I wondered how many of those husks I'd seen in McMurdo had started here, bottled up and shipped out. The Syndicate wasn't just a gang of crooks, they were priests to something down there, offering up souls to keep it quiet. And Elias, he'd seen it, hadn't he? That's why he'd left me that map, why his voice was calling now. I forced myself up, legs stiff and sore, and started back toward McMurdo, the shelf stretching out like a bad dream I couldn't shake. The wind shoved me hard, snow stinging my face, but I kept going, replaying that shadow in my head. It wasn't human, not anymore, but it moved like it remembered how. My mind raced, piecing it together, the workers disappearing, the glow in the ice, the Syndicate's grip on this place. They were digging for more than profit, they were digging for power, and whatever was under that ice was giving it to them, piece by piece, soul by soul. Back at the station, I slipped into the bunkhouse, quiet as a thief, and sank onto my cot. The others slept, or pretended to, their breaths fogging in the dim light. I pulled out Elias's map, tracing the scratches with a shaky finger, and felt that hum again, faint, but there, like a pulse under my feet. The tunnel was just the start, whatever they were hiding went deeper, down where the ice turned black and the air went wrong. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come, not with that shadow burned into my lids, not with Elias's voice ringing in my ears. Out there, under the Ross ice shelf, something was stirring, and I just kicked the hornet's nest. The bunkhouse was a tomb that night, a cold box of snores and shadows where the air hung thick with sweat and fear. I lay there, eyes tracing cracks in the ceiling, Elias's map pressed against my chest like a talisman, or a curse. That tunnel under the Ross ice shelf wouldn't let me go, it clung to me like damp on a coat, sour and heavy, whispering through the dark. I could still smell it, that rot, that wrongness, and feel the weight of that shadow swaying down there, picking at something I didn't want to name. My hands shook as I unfolded the Zippo, its scratched lines glinting faint under the bunk's weak bulb. Elias had seen it too, hadn't he? Whatever the Syndicate was feeding, he'd stumbled into it, and now it was calling me, his voice, thin and lost, echoing up from that black water like a plea I couldn't answer. Sleep wasn't an option, not with that hum under my feet, a low buzz that wasn't just the wind or the ice settling. It was alive, pulsing through the floor, up my spine, like something down there was tapping out a rhythm only I could hear. I rolled off the cot, quiet as a mouse in a cat's house, and pulled on my boots. The others didn't stir, they were too far gone, worn down by the Syndicate's grind, their dreams probably as empty as their bellies. I slipped out into the night, the cold hitting me like a fist, sharp and unforgiving, the kind of chill that makes you wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. McMurdo sprawled around me, a scatter of sheds and lights under a sky that didn't give a damn, and I headed back toward the shelf, back to that crack, that tunnel, that shadow. The trek was longer this time, or maybe it just felt that way with the wind screaming in my ears, shoving me back like it knew where I was going and didn't like it one bit. Snow stung my face, tiny needles biting at my cheeks, and I kept my head down, eyes on the ground, following tracks I'd left before they blew away. The Ross ice shelf loomed up again, a white beast crouched under the dark, its edges glinting like teeth in the starlight. I found the crevice right where I'd left it, a dark slit in the ice that seemed wider now, hungrier, like it had stretched itself open just for me. My flashlight flickered as I squeezed through, the beam wobbling like it was scared to see what was down there, and I dropped into the tunnel again, boots thudding on ice that felt too soft, too alive. The smell hit me harder this time, sour and thick, like a cellar gone bad, a whiff of something that had been dead too long but wouldn't stay still. I swept my light around, slow and careful, and the tunnel unfolded like a nightmare you can't shake. The walls were a junkyard, rusted machines leaning like drunks, crates stacked crooked with faded marks, and those jars, rows of them, glowing soft and sick, a pale green that made my stomach turn. I edged closer to one, breath fogging in the chill, and saw it clearer, a thick liquid inside, swirling slow, with flecks of something dark floating like ash in a storm. My mind flashed to the workers, the ones who'd slipped and never came back, their eyes cloudy like they'd been drained dry. This was it, wasn't it? The Syndicate's poison, bottled up and shipped out, turning people into husks for whatever they were hiding. I moved deeper, boots crunching on frost, each step echoing like a gunshot in the quiet. The tunnel sloped down, gentle at first, then steeper, pulling me into the dark like it wanted me there. My light caught on more junk, pipes twisted into knots, wires dangling like veins ripped loose, and something else, something that stopped me cold. A boot, old and cracked, half buried in the ice, its laces chewed up like something had tugged at them. I knelt, heart thudding, and brushed the snow away, Navy issue, the kind Elias wore back in '68. My throat tightened, and I dug faster, fingers numb, until I found a patch of fabric, faded blue, stitched with a name, Voss. It was his, no doubt, my granddad's, left here like a breadcrumb in this frozen hell. I stood, clutching that scrap, and the tunnel seemed to shift, the air growing heavier, pressing down like a hand on my chest. That's when I saw it again, the shadow, tall and thin, swaying slow in the dark ahead. My light barely touched it, but I could see more now, arms too long, fingers like wires curling slow, bending over that small shape in the gloom. My breath hitched, fogging wild, and I swear it paused, like it felt me watching, like it knew I was there. I didn't move, didn't dare, just stood frozen as it worked, silent and steady, fussing with whatever it had claimed. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't listen, not with Elias's boot in my hand, not with his voice still ringing in my head. Then the ice groaned, a deep, angry rumble that shook the walls, and I stumbled back, light swinging wild. The floor cracked, sharp, sudden, like a bone breaking, and black water oozed up, thick as tar, stinking of rot and ruin. It wasn't just water, it moved wrong, slow and deliberate, pooling around my boots like it was reaching for me. I scrambled back, heart slamming, and heard it, Elias's voice, clear as a bell, calling, "Lena," from somewhere deep in that mess. It wasn't a memory, it was him, trapped down there, his words bouncing off the ice like a plea from a grave I couldn't find. The shadow didn't flinch, didn't turn, just kept at its work as the water rose, and I bolted, clawing my way back to the crevice, the cold biting at my heels like it wanted a taste. I hauled myself out, gasping, the wind howling overhead like it was mocking me. The shelf stretched around me, white and endless, but I couldn't shake that tunnel, that shadow, that water, that voice. I sank to my knees, Elias's boot still clutched tight, and stared at the crevice, its dark mouth breathing that sour stink. Those jars glowed in my mind, pulsing like a heartbeat, and I knew it now, the Syndicate wasn't just smuggling poison. They were feeding something down there, something that took people apart and kept Elias. My chest heaved, breath fogging in the starlight, and I realized I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The walk back to McMurdo was a blur, snow crunching underfoot, wind tearing at my face like it wanted to peel me bare. I kept seeing that shadow, those jars, that boot, pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve but couldn't let go. The Syndicate wasn't just a pack of crooks, they were priests to something ancient, something that didn't die, something they'd woken up under the Ross ice shelf. And Elias, he'd seen it, hadn't he? That's why he'd left that map, why his voice was calling now, pulling me deeper into this mess. I stumbled into the bunkhouse, sank onto my cot, and stared at the ceiling, the hum under my feet louder now, insistent, like a drumbeat calling me back. I didn't sleep that night, not with that shadow burned into my eyes, not with Elias's voice echoing in my skull. The Syndicate was hiding something under the ice, something they'd killed to keep quiet, and I just stuck my hand in the hornet's nest. The cold was alive out there, and it wasn't just watching anymore, it was waiting, and it knew I wasn't done. The bunkhouse ceiling stared back at me, cracked and gray, like the sky over McMurdo had leaked inside and settled there to rot. I lay on that thin cot, Elias's map pressed against my ribs, its edges digging in like it wanted to crawl under my skin. The hum was louder now, a steady thrum under the floorboards, not just some trick of the wind or the ice groaning out there, it was deliberate, insistent, like a heartbeat calling me back to that tunnel under the Ross ice shelf. I couldn't close my eyes, couldn't shut out that shadow I'd seen swaying in the dark, those long fingers picking at something small and still. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and Elias's boot sat heavy in my pack, a piece of him I'd clawed out of that frozen hell. What had they done to him down there? What were they still doing? I rolled over, staring at the others, workers sprawled out like sacks of grain, their breaths fogging in the dim light, faces hollowed out by more than just cold and hunger. They didn't know what I'd seen, didn't hear what I'd heard, but I could feel it in the air, fear, thick as the frost on the windows, a fear they'd buried under exhaustion. The Syndicate had them on a leash, dig or disappear, and I'd seen where the disappearing went. Those jars, glowing sick and soft, weren't just some backroom brew, they were pieces of people, bottled up and shipped out, feeding whatever the Frost Syndicate was hiding. My stomach churned, a cold knot twisting tight, and I wondered how many of these poor bastards had ended up down there, husks with cloudy eyes, waiting for me to find them. The night stretched on, endless and black, and I couldn't stay put, not with that hum buzzing through me, not with Elias's voice still ringing in my ears. I slipped off the cot, boots quiet on the creaking floor, and grabbed my flashlight, its beam weak and flickering like it was scared to leave the dark behind. The bunkhouse door groaned as I eased it open, and the cold rushed in, sharp as a slap, sinking its teeth into my bones. McMurdo lay still outside, a scatter of sheds and shadows under a sky prickled with stars, but it wasn't peaceful, it was waiting, holding its breath like a beast about to pounce. I headed back to the shelf, back to that crevice, because I had to know, had to see if Elias was still down there, trapped in that black water, calling me to pull him out. The wind was a mean bastard on the way, howling like it wanted me gone, shoving snow into my face till my cheeks burned raw. I kept my head down, boots crunching through drifts that snapped like dry twigs, following a path I'd burned into my mind. The Ross ice shelf loomed up again, a white wall under that coal-black sky, its edges glinting faint like a knife left out to rust. The crevice was there, same as before, but it felt different now, wider, deeper, like it had grown teeth since I'd last climbed out. My flashlight flickered as I wedged through, the beam dancing wild on walls too smooth, too old, and I dropped down into the tunnel, landing hard on ice that felt soft and wrong, like it was breathing under my weight. That smell hit me like a fist, sour, thick, a rot that wasn't just dead but restless, clawing at my throat. I swept my light around, slow and careful, and the tunnel opened up like a bad dream you can't wake from. The junk was still there, rusted machines leaning crooked, crates stacked like tombstones, those jars glowing soft and sick, a pale green that made my skin crawl. I edged closer to one, breath fogging sharp in the chill, and peered inside, liquid swirling slow, dark flecks drifting like ash in a storm, and something else, something small and still, floating like a memory gone bad. My mind flashed to the kid they'd hauled off, his eyes wide with panic, and I knew it then. This was what they took, what they turned people into, husks, bottled up and fed to something deeper down. I moved on, boots crunching frost, the tunnel sloping steeper now, pulling me into the dark like it had hands. My light caught on more, pipes twisted into knots, wires hanging like veins torn loose, and that boot again, Elias's, still where I'd left it, half buried in the ice. I knelt, brushing snow off the faded vase stitched into the fabric, and felt a shiver that wasn't just cold. He'd been here, right here, and they'd taken him, left this piece behind like a taunt, a breadcrumb to drag me down after him. The air grew heavier, pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake, and I stood, clutching that boot, when I saw it again, the shadow, tall and thin, swaying slow in the gloom ahead. My light barely touched it, but it was clearer now, arms too long, fingers curling like wire, bending over that small shape in the dark. My breath hitched, fogging wild, and I swear it paused, like it felt me there, like it knew I'd come back. I didn't move, just stood frozen, heart slamming loud enough to wake the dead, watching as it worked, silent and steady, fussing with whatever it had claimed. My mind screamed run, but my feet were rooted, locked by Elias's boot in my hand, his voice in my head. The ice groaned then, a deep rumble that shook the walls, and I stumbled back, light swinging wild. The floor cracked, sharp, sudden, like a snapped rib, and black water oozed up again, thick and slow, stinking of rot and ruin. It moved wrong, deliberate, pulling around my boots like it wanted me to stay. I scrambled back, heart in my throat, and heard it, Elias's voice, clear as day, calling, "Lena," from that black mess. It wasn't a trick, it was him, bouncing off the ice like he was down there, caught in whatever the Syndicate was hiding. The shadow didn't flinch, just kept at its work as the water rose, and I bolted, clawing my way up to the crevice, the cold biting at my heels like it was alive. I hauled myself out, gasping, the wind howling overhead like it was laughing at me. The shelf stretched around me, white and endless, but I couldn't shake that tunnel, that shadow, that water, that voice. I sank to my knees, Elias's boot still clutched tight, and stared at the crevice, its dark mouth breathing that sour stink. The jars glowed in my mind, pulsing like a heartbeat, and I knew it now, the Syndicate wasn't just smuggling poison, they were priests to something down there, offering up souls to keep it quiet. Elias had seen it, stumbled into it, and they'd taken him, left his boot, his voice, to pull me in after. I forced myself up, legs trembling, and started back to McMurdo, the wind tearing at me like it wanted to strip me bare. The snow crunched underfoot, a steady beat, but my head was a mess, shadows swaying, jars glowing, Elias calling. The Syndicate wasn't just crooks, they were keepers of something ancient, something that didn't die, something they'd woken under the shelf. Back at the station, I slipped into the bunkhouse, sank onto my cot, and stared at the ceiling, the hum louder now, a drumbeat under my feet. The others slept, oblivious, but I couldn't, not with that shadow burned into my eyes, not with Elias's voice echoing like a bell I couldn't unring. I pulled out his map, tracing the scratches with a shaky finger, and felt the ice shift, not outside, but inside me. The Syndicate was hiding something under the Ross ice shelf, something they'd killed to keep buried, and I just kicked the door wide open. The night dragged on, slow and cruel, and I lay there, listening to that hum grow, feeling it pull me back. I'd found Elias's boot, heard his voice, seen their shadow, but it wasn't enough. The Syndicate wasn't done, and neither was whatever they were feeding. It was awake now, stirring under the ice, and it knew my name. I closed my eyes, but the dark didn't help, just brought that shadow closer, swaying slow, waiting for me to come back. Out there, under the shelf, the cold was alive, and it wasn't letting me go. What's down there in Antarctica that's got the ice whispering like it's got secrets to spill? You ever wonder what kind of shadow could stretch across a place so cold it freezes your breath before it leaves your mouth? Is it just the wind playing tricks, or something that'd make you wish you'd never set foot on this godforsaken slab? And those folks running the show, don't you reckon they're hiding a truth so twisted they'd bury it under 1,000 years of frost just to keep it quiet? I'm Lena Voss, and I've been asking those questions since McMurdo Station turned into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. 3 days in this frozen hell, chasing my granddad Elias's ghost, and all I'd found was a boot, a voice, and a hum that wouldn't let me go. Now, I was starting to think the ice wasn't just watching, it was waiting, and it had my name on its lips. That night in the bunkhouse was a cage, the kind of quiet that sits on your chest like a stone you can't push off. I lay there, Elias's map pressed against my ribs, its edges biting through my shirt like a promise, or a threat. The hum was back, buzzing up from the floor, steady as a pulse, and it wasn't just some trick of the wind or the ice settling, it was alive, tugging at me like a hook in my gut. I'd seen too much under the Ross ice shelf, jars glowing sick and soft, a shadow swaying over something small and still, and the Syndicate's overseers running McMurdo like a prison camp. They weren't digging for science or survival, they were after something bigger, something they'd lose people to keep under wraps. I couldn't sit with that, not with Elias's voice echoing from that tunnel, calling me back. Morning came slow, gray and mean, and I made a call. I'd tag along with a digging crew, keep my head low, and see what they were clawing out of the ice. I blended in with the grunts headed out past McMurdo, a sorry bunch with picks slung over their shoulders and eyes that didn't dare look up. The overseers didn't give a damn who you were as long as you swung, and I played the part, boots crunching snow, breath fogging in air so sharp it cut my lungs. We marched a mile out to a flat stretch marked by stakes driven deep, like they were pinning down a beast. The ice here wasn't clean like Winter Quarters Bay, it was cloudy, streaked with dark veins twisting down into the dark, like roots nobody planted. I swung my pick with the rest, but my eyes were everywhere, every strike sent up a shiver, a buzz that didn't feel right, like we were tapping on a door better left locked. The head man, hatchet face, I called him, all sharp angles and no soul, paced the line, barking deeper, like a preacher chasing redemption. The workers moved slow, hands wrapped in rags that didn't do squat against the chill, and I kept watching. Then it happened. A kid, barely 20, all skin and scared eyes, froze mid-swing, staring into the hole he'd made. I sidled over, casual as you please, and saw it, a glint in the ice, soft and wrong, like fireflies gone sour in a jar. It pulsed, faint and steady, a heartbeat trapped down there. The kid's breath hitched, fogging wild, and before I could say a word, Hatchet Face was on him, yanking him back so hard his feet dangled like a rag doll's. "Keep moving," Hatchet growled, but his eyes flicked to that glow, and I saw it, fear, or maybe something darker, like he knew what it was and wished he didn't. They hustled the kid off, said he'd slipped and needed rest, but I wasn't buying it. He'd seen something he wasn't supposed to, and they made damn sure he wouldn't talk. We kept digging, but the air turned heavy, the sky pressing down like it knew what was coming. My hands ached, my head spun, and that hum, it was louder now, thrumming through the ice like a song I couldn't unhear. Night fell fast, a black curtain slamming shut, and I trudged back to the bunkhouse alone. My mind was a mess, shadows swaying, jars glowing, Elias calling, and I couldn't shake that glint in the ice. The Syndicate wasn't just digging for profit, they were digging for power, something alive down there, something they were feeding piece by piece. I pulled out Elias's map, traced the scratches with a shaky finger, and felt that hum again, closer, pulling me like a tide I couldn't fight. Sleep wouldn't come, not with that shadow burned into my lids, not with Elias's voice ringing in my skull like a bell I couldn't silence. Next day, I switched tracks. The overseers were starting to notice me, their stares lingering like flies on a dead thing, so I needed a new angle, someone who knew the score. That's when I found Jax, a wiry old-timer with a face like a crumpled paper bag, twitchy and quiet, one of the few who'd lasted at McMurdo. I'd seen him flinch at the overseer's barks, seen his hands shake when he thought no one was looking. He had answers, and I was damn well going to get them. I cornered him in the mess hall, sliding into the seat across from him while he nursed a cup of sludge they called coffee. "You've been here a while," I said, keeping my voice low. "You know what they're digging for?" He didn't bite, just stared into his mug like it held the meaning of life. "I've seen things," I pressed. "Under the shelf. They're hiding something." That got his eyes up, sharp and scared, darting over his shoulder like the walls might tattle. "You don't want to know," he muttered, so quiet I barely caught it. "Knowing gets you lost." "Lost how?" I asked, but he clammed up tighter than a clam at low tide. I slid Elias's boot across the table, watched his face go white as the snow outside. "My granddad," I said. "He knew too, didn't he? That's why he's gone." Jax's hands shook, coffee sloshing, and he pushed the boot back like it was poison. "They take what they need," he whispered, "and they feed it. You've seen the jars." I nodded, and he swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing like a cork in a storm. "It's not just liquid in there. It's pieces. Of us. Of them." My gut went cold, a stone sinking fast. "Pieces?" I echoed, but he was already up, chair scraping loud, eyes wild as a cornered dog's. "Don't go back," he hissed. "Don't let it see you." Then he bolted, leaving me with a head full of questions and that damn boot staring back like it knew more than I did. Pieces. Of us. Of them. The jars, the shadow, the syndicate, it was snapping into place like a puzzle I didn't want to finish. They weren't just crooks, they were running a harvest, feeding something under the ice. But what? Why? I needed to see it, needed to go deeper, down where the ice turned black and the air went sour. Jax's words stuck like burrs, "Don't let it see you." What the hell did he mean? What was down there that could see? That night, I slipped out when the bunkhouse went still, the wind cutting through my parka like a knife through butter. I couldn't go back to the shelf, not yet, not with the overseers sniffing around, so I headed for Vostok Station, a lonely outpost further inland, colder than sin and twice as quiet. Word was they'd been digging there too, and I figured if the syndicate was spreading their net, that's where I'd find the next thread. The trek was brutal, wind howling like a banshee, snow stinging my face till it burned raw, but I kept moving, Elias's map tucked close, his boot a weight I couldn't shake. Vostok hit me like a wall, colder, bleaker, a scatter of sheds under a sky that didn't care. The ice here was different, thicker, older, like it had seen things it wouldn't tell. I found a digging site a half-mile out, stakes marking a patch streaked with those same dark veins, and my stomach twisted. They were here too, the syndicate, clawing deeper, feeding that hum I couldn't escape. I swung a pick with the crew, kept my head down, but every strike sent that buzz up my arms, louder now, like a drumbeat calling me down. Then I saw it, a crate, half buried in the ice, cracked open like an egg. Inside, jars, more of them, glowing that sick green, pulsing slow. I edged closer, light catching the labels, T. Hayes, 24. L. Voss, 68. My breath stopped, my heart slamming like a jackhammer. Elias. They'd taken him, bottled him, fed him to whatever was down there. I stumbled back, head spinning, and felt it, the hum turning to a roar, the ice shaking under my feet, like something was waking up, something that knew I'd come. The crate sat there in the ice like a coffin cracked open, its jars glowing that sick green light that made my stomach turn inside out. I'd see my name, L. Voss, 68, etched on one of them, right next to Elias's ghost, and it hit me like a freight train. They'd taken him, bottled him up, turned him into something I couldn't even name. The hum was a roar now, shaking the ground under my boots, and I stumbled back from that dig site near Vostok Station, my breath fogging wild in the razor-cold air. What the hell were they feeding down there? What kind of twisted game was the Frost Syndicate playing with these jars, these pieces of us? And why did I feel like the ice was grinning at me, like it had been waiting for me to figure it out? I stood there, chest heaving, the wind howling around me like a pack of dogs let loose, and the crew kept swinging their picks like nothing had happened, like they hadn't just unearthed a box full of souls. My flashlight shook in my hand, throwing jittery beams across the snow, and I couldn't tear my eyes off that crate. The labels burned into my skull: T. Hayes, 24, L. Voss, 68, dates and names like tombstones, a ledger of the lost. The Syndicate wasn't just digging for power, they were harvesting something alive and hungry under the ice, and Elias had been part of it, part of their offering. My knees wobbled, and I sank down, the cold seeping through my parka like it wanted to claim me too. The hum turned into a growl, low and mean, vibrating up my spine like a warning I couldn't ignore. I forced myself up, legs shaky as a newborn colt's, and backed away from the sight, the crew's silhouettes fading into the snow. I couldn't stay there, not with that crate staring back at me, not with Elias's name glowing in the dark like a beacon pulling me under. I stumbled back toward Vostok, the wind shoving me hard, snow stinging my face till it burned raw, but my head was a mess, jars pulsing, shadows swaying, Elias calling. I'd thought McMurdo was bad, but this was deeper, darker, like I'd stepped into the belly of something I couldn't outrun. Vostok Station squatted under a sky black as coal, its sheds hunched against the cold like they were trying to hide. The ice here was older, thicker, streaked with those dark veins I'd seen before, twisting down into the depths like fingers clawing for something lost. I slipped into a supply shed, the door creaking loud enough to wake the dead, and sank against a stack of crates, my breath fogging in the dim light. The hum was everywhere now, under my feet, in my bones, a steady thrum that wouldn't let me rest. I pulled out Elias's map, its scratches glinting faint under my flashlight, and traced the lines with a finger that wouldn't stop shaking. It pointed deeper, past the shelf, past Vostok, down to where the ice turned black and the air went wrong. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that map, but the cold started creeping in, slow and sneaky, wrapping around my chest like a snake squeezing tight. My mind kept spinning back to Jax's words, pieces of US, of them, and those jars, glowing like they were alive, like they held more than just liquid. I'd seen the shadow under the shelf, seen it working on something small and still, and now I was starting to think it wasn't just one shadow, it was a whole damn choir, swaying down there, feeding whatever the Syndicate was keeping alive. My gut told me Elias wasn't gone, not all the way. He was down there, trapped, calling me to pull him out, or to join him. The shed door banged open, wind howling through, and I jumped, flashlight swinging wild. A figure stood there, tall, broad, face hidden in the dark, but I knew that silhouette anywhere, Frostbite, the Syndicate's enforcer, the bastard I'd seen stalking McMurdo like a wolf on the prowl. His breath didn't fog, didn't even show, and that sent a chill down my spine colder than the ice outside. He stepped in, slow and deliberate, boots thudding heavy, and I scrambled back, heart slamming like a jackhammer. His face came into the light, scarred and gray, eyes flat as dead fish, skin stretched tight like it didn't fit right. I'd seen him before, but up close, he wasn't human, not anymore. "You've been digging," he said, voice low and rough, like gravel under a tire. "Should have stayed put." I didn't answer, just gripped my flashlight tighter, my other hand fumbling for Elias's boot like it could save me. He didn't move fast, just kept coming, slow as death, those flat eyes locked on me like I was meat on a hook. "They don't like it when you dig," he went on, head tilting odd, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "They see you now." "Who?" I croaked, throat dry as dust, but he didn't answer, just smiled, a thin, crooked thing that didn't reach his eyes. The hum spiked, sharp and loud, rattling the crates around us, and I bolted, ducking past him, out into the night. He didn't chase, not right away, but I felt him behind me, a weight pressing down, like the cold itself was on his side. I ran blind, snow crunching underfoot, wind tearing at my parka like it wanted to rip me apart. Vostok faded into the dark, and I didn't stop till my legs gave out, dropping me into a drift a mile out. My chest heaved, breath fogging wild, and I lay there, staring at the sky, the hum pounding in my ears like a drumbeat from hell. Frostbite's words stuck, "They see you now," and I couldn't shake the feeling I'd crossed a line, kicked a nest I couldn't unkick. The Syndicate wasn't just feeding something, they were serving it, and I just painted a target on my back. I dragged myself up, snow clinging to me like a shroud, and headed back to Vostok, slower now, every step heavy with dread. The station loomed up, quiet and still, but the air felt wrong, thicker, heavier, like it was watching me too. I slipped into the bunkhouse, sank onto my cot, and pulled out Elias's map again, fingers tracing the lines like a prayer. The hum was a roar now, shaking the floor, and I knew it wasn't just the ice, it was them, whatever they were, waking up slow and mean under Vostok's frozen skin. I didn't sleep that night, not with Frostbite's dead eyes burned into my skull, not with Elias's voice calling from the dark. The jars, the shadow, the Syndicate, it was all connected, a sick web spinning tighter around me. I'd found Elias's name, felt his pull, but it wasn't enough. The Syndicate was deeper than I'd thought, and whatever they were feeding was closer than ever. The cold was alive, and it wasn't letting me go, not yet, not ever. What's really down there under the Antarctic Peninsula when the ice finally decides it's had enough? You ever lie awake wondering what kind of shadow could squat in a place so cold it freezes your soul before you even feel it? Is it just a big empty nothing, or something that'd make you claw your own eyes out if you saw it move? And those bastards running the show, don't you think they'd slit throats and burn bridges to keep it buried, to keep it fed? I'm Lena Voss, for days deep in this frozen hellhole, and I've been asking those questions since McMurdo turned into a nightmare I couldn't crawl out of. I'd found Elias's boot under the Ross ice shelf, heard his voice calling from Vostok's black water, felt Frostbite's dead stare like a noose tightening around my neck. Now, I was starting to think the ice wasn't just hiding something, it was holding it prisoner, and I just swung the hammer that cracked the damn cage wide open. The bunkhouse at Vostok that night was a tomb, the kind of quiet that creeps into your bones and sits there, heavy as lead. I lay on my cot, Elias's map pressed against my chest like a heartbeat I couldn't shake, its jagged scratches digging through my shirt like they wanted to carve their way in. The hum was a beast now, roaring up from the floorboards, rattling my teeth, shaking the thin walls like it was pissed I'd dared to listen. It wasn't wind, wasn't ice settling. It was alive, mean as hell, clawing up from the frozen guts of this place like it knew I'd seen too much. I'd found those jars at the Vostok dig site, Elf Voss, 68 glowing that sick green light, Elias's soul trapped in a bottle like some twisted science project, and Frostbite's words kept rattling in my skull, "They see you now." Who? The Syndicate? Or something worse, something they'd been fattening up down there with pieces of us? I couldn't lie still, not with that hum pounding like a war drum, not with Elias's ghost tugging at me like a fishhook in my gut. I'd heard whispers around Vostok, hushed talk of another site out near the Antarctic Peninsula, further west, where the ice was thinner, cracked, older than sin, like it was tired of holding its secrets. The Syndicate was moving there, digging harder, deeper, and I knew that's where the trail led, where Elias was, if there was anything left of him to find. I rolled off the cot, boots hitting the floor quiet as a whisper, and grabbed my gear, flashlight, map, that damn boot like a weight I couldn't drop. The bunkhouse door groaned as I eased it open, a low, mournful sound, and the cold rushed in like a slap, sharp and cruel, sinking its teeth into my bones like it wanted to chew me up and spit me out. Vostok faded into the dark behind me as I trudged out, wind howling like a pack of wolves gone mad, snow stinging my face till it burned raw and red. The peninsula was a hell of a haul, hours through drifts that crunched underfoot like brittle twigs, wind tearing at my parka like it wanted to peel me back to Portland, but I kept moving, flashlight cutting a shaky beam through the black. My head was a storm, jars glowing, shadows swaying, frostbite's crooked grin, and every step felt like I was walking into a trap I'd set myself, a noose tightening with every breath. The hum followed me, steady and vicious, a pulse in the ice that matched my heartbeat, like it was singing me a lullaby I couldn't outrun. I'd thought McMurdo was bad, Vostok worse, but this was the edge, the place where the ice gave up and the dark took over. The peninsula loomed up after what felt like a lifetime, a jagged stretch of ice under a sky black as coal dust, cracked and broken like something had clawed its way out and left the scars behind. I found the site, a sprawl of stakes and crates scattered across the snow, workers hunched against the wind, digging like their souls depended on it. The ice here was thin, brittle, veined with dark streaks that pulsed faint and slow, like blood moving under skin too old to heal. I slipped into the crew, pick in hand, and swung with the rest, keeping my head down but my eyes wide open. Every strike sent that hum up my arms, louder now, shaking me like it was trying to climb out, and I could feel it, something stirring, something waking up slow and pissed under the frost. The air was thick, heavy with a chill that didn't just bite, it gnawed, sinking into my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I swung harder, snow dust rising, breath fogging sharp, and watched the others, workers with hollow eyes, hands cracked and bleeding, moving like machines that had forgotten how to stop. The overseers paced the line, pale-faced and sharp-eyed, barking orders like they were herding cattle to the slaughter. Deeper, they kept saying, deeper, and I wondered what the hell they were chasing, what could be worth this, worth turning people into husks and feeding them to the dark. My pick hit something hard, a dull thunk echoing up, and I froze, peering into the hole I'd made. There it was, a crate, bigger than the one at Vostok, half buried in the ice, cracked open like a skull split wide. I edged closer, flashlight trembling, and saw them, jars spilling out, glowing that sick green light, pulsing slow like a heartbeat you didn't want to hear. I brushed snow off one, breath catching, and read the labels, R. Klein, 22. E. Voss, 68. My heart slammed, a trapped bird beating against my ribs, and I reached for it, Elias's jar, another piece of him glowing in the dark, alive in a way that turned my stomach to ice. I grabbed it, fingers shaking, the glass cold as death under my gloves, and that's when the ice groaned, a deep, guttural rumble that shook the ground, knocking me flat on my ass. The workers froze, picks dangling, heads snapping up like deer caught in headlights, and I heard it, a crack, sharp as a gunshot, splitting the ice wide open right under us. Black water oozed up, thick and slow, stinking of rot and ruin, pooling around the crate like blood from a fresh wound. I scrambled back, flashlight swinging wild, and saw them, shapes in the ice, dozens of them, pressed against the cracks like they'd been waiting there all along. Their skin was pale, mottled, stretched tight over bones that didn't sit right, and their eyes, God help me, their eyes were open, cloudy but staring, locked on me like they knew my name. Their mouths moved slow, silent, like they were whispering something I couldn't hear, and my stomach twisted so hard I thought I'd puke right there in the snow. The hum turned to a roar, shaking the peninsula, snow dust rising like smoke, and I bolted, running blind through the drift, wind tearing at me like it wanted me back in that hole. My boots slipped, my lungs burned, but I didn't stop, not till I hit a ridge a half-mile out, slamming into a slab of ice so hard it knocked the breath out of me. I collapsed, chest heaving, breath fogging wild in the black, and stared back at the site, the cracks spreading like spiderwebs, the jars glowing brighter, those shapes pressing harder against the ice. They weren't dead, not all the way. The Syndicate had kept them alive, trapped them, fed them to whatever was down there, and Elias was one of them, his soul split and bottled, calling me to this goddamn end. I fumbled for my camera, hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it, and hit record, pointing it back at the chaos. "This is Lena Voss," I rasped, voice cracking like dry wood, streaming live for inside the criminal world. "You're seeing it, the Syndicate's feeding something under the peninsula, something alive, something they've been trapping people for." The feed flickered, static cutting through like a bad dream, but I kept going, panning over the cracks, the jars, those cloudy eyes staring back. "They've got my granddad, Elias, pieces of him, pieces of us all. This ain't just crime, it's a nightmare, and it's waking up." The ice shook again, a deep crack splitting wider, and I ran, camera bouncing, feed glitching as I stumbled through the snow, wind howling like it wanted to swallow me whole. I didn't see Frostbite coming, not till his shadow fell over me, tall and broad as a mountain, blocking my path like a wall of death. His scarred face grinned, eyes flat and lifeless, skin stretched tight like it didn't belong on his bones. He moved slow, deliberate, boots thudding heavy, and I froze, flashlight beam catching his face, turning it into something out of a fever dream. "You're loud," he said, voice rough as a gravel road, head tilting odd like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "They don't like loud." I swung my flashlight, beam slicing the dark, but he didn't flinch, just kept coming, slow as sin, those dead eyes locked on me like I was meat on a hook. "Who?" I croaked, throat dry as dust, backing up till my boots hit ice. He didn't answer, just smiled that crooked smile, thin and sharp, like he was in on a secret I'd die to learn. The hum spiked, loud and sharp, rattling my skull, and the ice split again, right under me, a jagged crack yawning wide, black water surging up, cold as a grave, wrapping around my legs like it wanted to pull me under. I screamed, thrashing wild, camera slipping from my hands, splashing into the dark, but Frostbite just stood there, head cocked, watching me sink like it was a show he'd seen before. Then I heard it, Elias's voice, clear as a bell, cutting through the roar like a lifeline, "Lena, run." It wasn't from the water, not from Frostbite, it came from deeper down, where the cracks led, where the ice was breaking wide. My heart slammed, adrenaline kicking hard, and I clawed my way out, boots slipping, hands scraping ice till they bled, pulling myself free of that black grip. I bolted, leaving Frostbite in the dark, his shadow swaying slow like he knew I'd be back. The peninsula groaned behind me, ice splitting wider, a deep, guttural roar shaking the snow, and I knew I'd done it, cracked it open, not just the ice, but whatever they'd been holding back all these years. I ran till my legs gave out, collapsing in a drift, chest heaving, breath fogging in the black like a ghost I couldn't shake. The camera was gone, feed dead, but those eyes, those cloudy, staring eyes, burned into my skull, and Elias's voice echoed like a drum I couldn't silence. The Syndicate wasn't just feeding something, they were waking it, and I'd just lit the match. The cold was alive, and it wasn't letting me go, not now, not ever. The snow swallowed me up where I fell, a cold, wet shroud that clung like a second skin I couldn't peel off. I lay there, chest heaving like a busted engine, breath fogging in jagged bursts under that black Antarctic sky, and the peninsula roared behind me, a deep, guttural bellow that shook the ground like the earth itself was waking up pissed. I'd cracked it open, all right, not just the ice, but something older, something meaner, something the Frost Syndicate had been feeding all these years with jars and souls and lies. My camera was gone, sunk in that black water, feed dead, but those eyes, those cloudy, staring eyes pressed against the ice, burned into my skull like a brand I'd never shake. Elias's voice still rang, sharp and desperate, "Lena, run." And I couldn't tell if it was a warning or a plea, but it was real, echoing from somewhere deep where the cracks led. I dragged myself up, legs wobbly as a newborn calf's, snow caking my parka like it wanted to bury me right there. The wind howled, a banshee's wail tearing through the dark, and I turned back, squinting against the sting. The dig site was a mess, cracks spiderwebbing out like veins gone wild, black water seeping up slow and thick, glowing faint with that sick green light from the jars. The workers were gone, scattered or swallowed, I couldn't tell, but Frostbite's shadow lingered in my mind, swaying slow, his crooked grin promising I wasn't done yet. My flashlight was dim, flickering like a candle on its last breath, but I swept it over the ridge, ice jagged and broken, stretching out like a graveyard nobody'd claimed. The hum was everywhere now, a roar in my bones, a pulse that didn't just shake the ground, it shook me, like it was inside my head, whispering my name. I stumbled forward, boots crunching snow that didn't feel right, too soft, too warm, like it was melting from below. The peninsula stretched around me, cracked and groaning, and every step sent that hum spiking, a jagged rhythm that made my teeth ache. I didn't know where I was going, not back to Vostok, not with frostbite on my tail, but I couldn't stop, couldn't let the cold take me. My hands fumbled for Elias's map, its scratches glinting faint under the beam, and I traced them blind, fingers numb, heart slamming like a jackhammer. It pointed deeper, past the dig site, down where the ice turned thin and the dark took over, a place the Syndicate hadn't mapped but sure as hell knew about. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that wasn't wind, a low, wet gurgle, like something breathing through a throat full of muck. I froze, flashlight swinging wild, and saw it, a crack in the ice ahead, wider than the others, black water bubbling up slow, stinking of rot and ruin. My gut twisted, bile rising, but I crept closer, drawn like a moth to a flame I knew would burn me alive. The beam caught the edge, and there they were, more shapes, pressed against the ice like flies in a web, pale and mottled, skin stretched tight over bones that didn't fit right. Their eyes were open, cloudy and staring, locked on me like they'd been waiting, and their mouths moved slow, silent, whispering something I couldn't hear but felt in my bones. I backed off, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the hum, but the ice groaned again, a deep, shuddering crack that split the ground right under me. I stumbled, boots slipping, and the black water surged, cold as death, wrapping around my ankles like it had hands. It wasn't just water, it moved wrong, thick and deliberate, pulling me down slow like it wanted me to stay. I thrashed, clawing at the snow, flashlight tumbling into the dark, and saw them clearer now, dozens of them, rising slow from the cracks, pale fingers curling through the ice, reaching up like they'd been trapped too long and I'd just set them free. My scream caught in my throat, raw and ragged, and I kicked free, scrambling back as the ice split wider, a jagged maw yawning open. The hum turned to a howl, a sound that wasn't sound, more like a feeling, a weight pressing down, shaking the snow till it danced like ash in a storm. I ran, legs burning, wind tearing at me like it wanted to rip me apart, but I couldn't outrun it. The hum, the eyes, the hands. They were everywhere now, pale shapes clawing up through the cracks, slow and steady, their cloudy eyes glowing faint in the dark like lanterns from a world I didn't want to know. I hit a drift, collapsing hard, snow swallowing me up to my waist, and lay there, chest heaving, breath fogging wild. The peninsula was alive, groaning, cracking, shifting like it was shedding its skin, and I couldn't shake those shapes, those hands, reaching for me like they knew my name. My flashlight was gone, camera sunk, but I could still feel them, hear them, a chorus of silent whispers building in my skull. Elias's voice cut through, "Lena, run." Sharp and desperate, but it wasn't just a warning now, it was a cry, a plea from somewhere deep where the ice was breaking wide. I clawed my way up, snow caking my gloves, and stumbled forward, the hum roaring louder, shaking the ground like a beast waking up hungry. The wind carried that gurgle again, wet and wrong, and I turned, squinting into the dark. The cracks were spreading, black water surging up, and the shapes, they weren't just reaching now, they were climbing, slow and deliberate, pale fingers curling over the ice, pulling themselves free. My stomach twisted so hard I doubled over, dry heaving into the snow, but I couldn't look away, couldn't unsee them, their mottled skin glistening wet, their cloudy eyes locked on me like I was the prize they'd been waiting for. The ice shook again, a deep crack splitting wide, and I ran, boots slipping, snow crunching underfoot like bones snapping in the dark. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop, not till I hit a ridge, slamming into a slab of ice so hard it knocked the wind out of me. I collapsed, chest heaving, breath fogging in the black, and stared back. The peninsula was a chaos of cracks and water, glowing faint with that sick green light, and those shapes were everywhere, crawling slow, swaying like they were dancing to the hum. I fumbled for my pack, hands shaking, and pulled out Elias's boot, cracked, worn, Voss stitched faint, a piece of him I couldn't let go, even now. The hum spiked, loud and sharp, and I heard it, Elias's voice, clear as day, cutting through the roar like a knife. "Lena, you cracked it open." It wasn't from the shapes, not from the water, it came from deeper down, where the cracks led, where the ice was splitting wide. My heart slammed, a trapped bird beating wild, and I stumbled to my feet, boots sinking deep, snow clinging like it wanted to hold me back. The shapes were closer now, swaying slow, their pale hands curling through the dark, and I knew it, I'd done more than crack the ice. I'd cracked the wall, let something loose, something the Syndicate had been feeding all these years. I turned, running blind, wind tearing at me like it wanted to rip me apart, but the hum followed, a roar, a howl, a song I couldn't outrun. The peninsula was alive, breaking wide, and those shapes, they weren't just husks, not just victims, they were something else, something older, something that knew my name. Elias's voice echoed, "Run, Lena, run." And I did, legs burning, heart pounding, snow swallowing my tracks like it wanted to erase me. The Syndicate wasn't just harvesting, they were waking it, and I just lit the fuse. The ice swallowed Elias's face like it was jealous of the light I dared to shine on it, his cloudy eyes fading into the black water under the Antarctic peninsula's cracked skin. I knelt there, snow soaking through my knees, breath fogging wild in the dark, and felt that hum, low now, a whisper crawling up my spine like a secret I couldn't unhear. Those pale shapes swayed closer, their mottled hands curling through the snow, cloudy eyes glowing faint under a sky that didn't give a damn. I'd cracked the wall, let them loose, whatever the Frost Syndicate had been feeding all these years, and now they were free, spreading slow and steady, a tide I couldn't stop. Elias's boot lay half buried beside me, Voss stitched faint like a gravestone I'd carved myself, and his last words echoed, "You can't stop it," a knife in my gut I couldn't pull free. I stood, legs shaky as a drunk's, wind tearing at my parka like it wanted to strip me bare, and stared into the chaos, the peninsula breaking wide, black water surging, those shapes swaying like a choir from a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The big one loomed tallest, its pale head tilted odd, cloudy eyes locked on me like it knew my blood, my bones, my every damn breath. I didn't run, not this time. My hands were empty, camera gone, flashlight sunk, but I faced it, chest heaving, feeling like the cold wasn't just around me, it was in me, alive and whispering, calling me home to the ice I'd cracked open. This is where it ends, or begins, depending on how you see it. I'm Lena Voss, and I've shown you the truth on Inside the Criminal World, the Syndicate's harvest, the jars, the things they fed under the ice. They're out there now, spreading, and I can't uncrack that wall. But you can help me figure this out. Hit that subscribe button if you're with me, don't miss what's coming next, 'cause this ain't over. Like this video if it gave you chills, share it with anyone who needs to know what's waking up under Antarctica. And drop a comment, tell me, what do you think's down there? Was Elias warning me, or begging me to join him? What would you do if the ice started whispering your name? I'm reading every word, 'cause I'm not alone in this, not anymore. The hum faded, a soft buzz in the dark, and I turned, boots crunching snow, leaving the peninsula behind, but not really. Those shapes swayed slow, their cloudy eyes glowing, and I felt it, the cold wasn't letting me go. It's awake now, and it knows me. Stick with me, folks, we're in this together.